It's nice to have everyone on the call today. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick little introduction for Erin before, let me make sure we have, there we go. Okay, so this is Dr. Erin Friess. She is an associate professor for technical communication. I always want to call it TechCom, which I know it is, but we'll say the formal title. So technical communication at UNT. She received her PhD in rhetoric and her master's in professional writing from Carnegie Mellon. Her current interests include user-centered design, usability and user experience testing, and workplace communication. So welcome, Erin, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and make you the spotlight video.
Okay.
All right. So take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Oh, haha.
Is it working?
Hold on. Let's see. Oh, desktop. Let's see if I...
It's working.
Okay. My... Except for some reason. Okay. Y'all got it now? Okay, awesome. All right, so thanks for joining me. Yes, today I'm going to talk about what is usability and what is UX. We're going to start off by talking about a few examples of usability, just a little bit about the history of usability. I'm going to discuss a little bit about user experience, which I will call UX, and some simple fixes and things that might help you out. And like Mari just said, I am Erin Friess. I've been at UNT for 12 years now. I got my master's and PhD at Carnegie Mellon, which is in Pittsburgh, if you don't know that. And I am now a Steelers fan, even though I grew up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, actually. I went to Arlington High. So it's kind of weird that I ended up back where I started. Usually I try to make this be a little interactive. It's going to be a little weird, so just bear with me and we'll make it. So I want you to look at this picture and I want you to think about what the name of this building is. So we've got a sign that says administration building, and we've got on the facade it says administration, and yet the name of this building is not the administration building. This is the building where I teach, and it's called the auditorium building. You can see on the facade that the building was made in 1923, so it was called the administration building then. But this placard that's out front was only put out there about 4 or 5 years ago. And so they put this placard out that says administration building. And around this building, there are no other signs to indicate that this building is in fact not the administration building. You have to actually go inside the building. And once you're inside, then there's a sign that says, oh, you are actually in the auditorium building. And I get people on my floor all the time saying, oh, I need to find the provost. I'm like, you need to walk 15 minutes south to be able to get to that building. So this is a usability problem, right? That there's signage that makes people feel confident that they are in the right spot, but no, they actually aren't. They are very much in the wrong spot. Here is another example, and this is from the 2000 election. And what most people remember from the 2000 election is the hanging Chad. And this is the ballot from Florida, right? So this is the guy looking to see if the little Chad is hanging off of the ballot. But another problem with the Florida ballots was just the general design of it. And it was called a butterfly ballot. So if you look at this ballot, if you wanted to vote for George Bush, you would have pushed the hole at the very top. And if you wanted to vote for Pat Buchanan, you'd vote for the second, you'd push the hole that was the second one from the top. And if you wanted to vote for Al Gore, you'd push the hole that was the third from the top. The summer before the election, there was a study done actually at the University of Florida to test the usability of this ballot. And what they did was that they took students and they told them to look at a list of 10 songs and pick the song that they liked the best. And then they had them vote for the song. So as they were going into their little voting booth, the students told the investigator who they intended to vote for. Then they went into the voting booth and voted on the butterfly ballot. And then the students told the investigator who they voted for. Okay, so, and this is how they did. Whoop. Okay, this is how accurately they voted. So when the people came out and said that they voted for the song that was in the same spot where the George Bush is located, those that said that they voted for Bush did in fact actually in the voting booth accurately vote for George Bush 98% of the time. Those that came out and said that they voted for the song that was in the Pat Buchanan place did in fact accurately vote for Pat Buchanan 88% of the time. That means that 12% of the time they accidentally voted for somebody else. And then those who voted for the song that was in the Al Gore position accurately voted for that song 70% of the time, which means that 30% of the time, people who thought that they voted for Al Gore actually voted for somebody else. And what they found out was that 25% of the students who said that they voted for Al Gore actually ended up voting for the song that was in the Pat Buchanan place. Now, if we extrapolate that to the actual election, Gore lost Florida by 537 votes, which was the equivalent of 4% of the Buchanan voters. So this is an example that usability can really affect, our lives and democracy and big picture things, not just people trying to find my office. Here is an example of, here's an example, I can't move. Oh, well, whatever. Of the American Airlines website from a few years ago. Now, I don't know if any of you ever used this, but there's some problems with this website. And this is the whole page over on this side. And then over here is the linkage, okay? So the problems here from a usability standpoint, there are two big ones. The first is that the space that is dedicated to going back is way bigger than the the target space for Go, right? That Go is much smaller. And so whenever you're trying to get people to actually move forward, you want to make sure that you give them a big target, not a small target. The other problem is that the Go button is red, and we have been taught since we're really little that Go is green, red is stop, warning, go back, do something else, right? So what they found out was that for about 5 years, 2 out of every 10 searches on this site ended with somebody hitting the start over button and then doing the exact same search over. And then if somebody did that twice, there was a 40% chance that they would leave the site rather than continue to try to figure out what they were doing wrong. So small things, just the colors, really make a big difference on people's usability of a site. Okay, and here is an example of a checkout from a major online sales company, electronic company. And you would get to this page after you search for the item and you're ready to check out. But the company found out that just because people who'd gone to this page and put things in their carts, that didn't mean that they were a shoo-in to purchase. So about 30% of the people who got to this page left the site without completing their purchase. So the company brought in a usability team and they did a study with 2 groups, people who had used the site before and people who had never used that site before. And they had found that people who had never used the site were super irritated that they had to enroll and give people their personal information before they could see how much shipping was. And all they wanted to know was how long it was going to take for them to get their stuff. Those that had been to this site before had trouble remembering what their username and password was. So half the people that had tested that had been to the site before had to use the forgot username feature and then had to wait to get the email. And this irritated people, and many people just left and decided not to complete the usability test. So they brought in this usability team and they found out that people don't like giving their information when they just want to find out simple information. So they suggested a change to this. And this is what we see all over the place now. So basically said, you know your ID, you know your password, great, sign in, that's awesome. But if you don't know it and you don't want to give us the information, not a problem. You can continue as a guest, and then you can continue your shopping and find out quickly how much it was going to be. They found out that over the course of the year, they made no other changes to the site, and they found out that year over year, they made $300 million more on the website with this setup than they did the previous year with this minor change. That's it. $300 million. So this is all usability, and this is all UX. So I'm going to give you a brief history of usability right now. Usability really first started off in the 1st century BC with Vitruvius, and he was really interested in architecture. So he was thinking about, how do we build buildings? And his 3 guidelines were Fimitas, which was the strength and sustainability of design; Utilitas, which was the suitability for the intended needs. So if you are building a house, how well does that house meet the needs of the people living in it? And Venustas, which is the beauty of the design. So how much do people like it? So these 3 ideas of, like, will the house stand up? Will it do what it needs to do? And is it beautiful? Are the sort of the guiding principles of what usability and user experience were from the 1st century. And then we sort of say goodbye to usability for a couple millennia. And then it shows back up in the 20th century. And it really started showing up again in military-based human factors in World War II. And how can we better design weapons, vehicles, and tools to enable people who are relatively untrained to quickly and accurately use those things? And one of the best examples of this is the comparison of the British Spitfire airplane to the United States Mustang P-51. And if you look at the dash of both of those airplanes, the cockpit, there you have a whole bunch of dials and dashes in them, but the pilot error was much smaller in the P-51 Mustang because of the people that were building the plane thought very carefully about where the dials and where the knobs should go that would be more intuitive for the pilots. So even though they look very complicated and look the same, the pilot error was reduced simply by where things were placed. The other thing that they really paid attention to was the instruction styles to increase reading speed and reduce errors. So a lot of what we know about reading levels, so if you're familiar with the Fleischmann reading scores, those were all built out of World War II, specifically for Navy sailors to assess at what level people could really understand. So modern usability began in the 1970s. So why did it begin in the 1970s? Well, because it was really the dawn of the digital age. We started getting computers that looked like this, which looks old and weird now. IBM's machines cost anywhere from $9,000 to $14,000, and Apple's machines cost around $3,000. And it's important to remember that a brand new Toyota Corolla in 1977 cost $2,700. So these suckers were expensive. So who could actually afford to use them if they were so expensive? So these were academics, these were researchers, people in the military, hobbyists, such, geeks. These were people that used computers who were computer experts. They generally knew how to make modifications to the system, and the system wouldn't crash, right? But then here comes the 1980s, and things in the world of computers are going to change. And what made the 1980s different and from a computer standpoint was really the introduction of what's called the graphical user interface, or the GUI interface. And what that means is that instead of having code that you have to enter on a command line at the bottom of a screen and put in some weird language in a way that made it easy for the computer to understand, you would have a interface that looked quite a bit like, that looked very easy to access. There were words. You didn't have to remember what things were. You could just find it and click on it. This, what you see is what you get, graphical user interface, really changed the way that people could interact with computers, which is great, but they were still very expensive. So around what would cost $6,500 today. Mac was targeted more towards creatives and home rather than business. And Mac could still be really buggy. So while other companies started to adopt some of the graphical user interface aspects of the Mac, most computers and software remained IBM. And those were usually done in business settings, financial settings, other kinds of settings that were not in the workplace. So IBM asked, okay, we've got all these people, they don't know how to use computers, and they have to use them at their work at places that, you know, they're not drawing things that are fun, they're not playing games, they're calculating how bank accounts. How can we make software that people really want to use? And so these two guys, Gould and Lewis, back at IBM in the early 1980s, said, okay, what if we stop designing software based on what the system can do? What if we designed it based on user needs? And this, I know, sounds really easy and dumb, but it kind of was earth-shattering at the time. If you think about it, whenever you get a remote control, or it's not such a big deal anymore because everything's voice enabled, but you used to get a remote control and it was huge and it would have hundreds of buttons on it, and really you needed two, right? So the people that were designing that remote control weren't designing it for the user who needed, 2 to 5 buttons to make something play, rewind, stop, pause. They were designing it based on what the piece of equipment could do. So Gould and Lewis said, look, this is what we need to do. We need to have an early focus on users and their tasks. And this is called audience analysis. Then we need to empirically measure people using the stuff. We need to actually test and evaluate to find out, do people like it? Can they work with it? And then we need to have some iterative design so that if people can't, we need to go back and change it. We need to not launch it as is and just deal with the consequences. So I've talked about all this and I haven't told you what usability is, but my definition of usability is, can intended users use an artifact to successfully accomplish a specific task? And then, was the action to accomplish the task efficient and effective and satisfactory? And we can find those things out through usability testing. And I'm not going to talk about usability testing today. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. But that's how we find out about usability. And so, for example, if you own a bakery and you decide to add an order for pickup to the website, and you might want to do this because you want to reduce the amount of time people spend looking at the bakery case, or you want to reduce the amount of time your staff spends on the phone. So you add it to your website and you practice your order several times and you get no errors. But then when you actually implement it, things aren't working quite the same way. You're only getting a handful of orders via the website every day, and you still get lots of phone calls and walk-ins, but now your staff also has to pay attention to the web results as well. So, what could be going on there? And that means maybe you need to test the usability of the site. People that build websites are often the worst people to test usability with. Designers often think that they have a good idea of what everybody's going to do, and they really don't. So maybe it appears that users can't use the artifact to complete the intended task. Maybe there's a technological problem. Maybe there's an anticipatory problem. Maybe what the users think is going to happen, the schema that they expect to follow, maybe that's not exactly what you're being presented with. So that leads us into usability and UX. And the way I think about usability and UX is this, that if I picked two of you and told you to drive to Houston, and I gave one of you the Toyota Corolla from 1988, and I gave the other one of you a late model Audi, and I said, drive to downtown Houston, you could probably be able to do that. You could do it probably efficiently if you were obeying the speed limit. But from terms of how much you enjoyed the experience, I'm going to guess that the person driving the late model Audi is going to enjoy it a little bit more than the mid 80s Toyota Corolla. So that's what UX is. To what extent was the experience pain-free and delightful? To what degree do users enjoy the activity of accomplishing the task? And we generally measure UX through UX assessment, which again, I will talk about in a couple of weeks. So if we think back to our example, maybe people are okay with ordering online, but they really like the walk-in experience and the website can't compete with that. Or maybe the UX is fine, but there's something wrong with the credit card intake that you weren't testing when you were building it. Or maybe the usability is fine, but people have an expectation of what the UX should be because they have used it from a different website before. Usually usability is going to influence UX, but that's not always the case. Usually you have to have good usability and good UX to make users happy. So if you don't have the usability, you're going to hurt the UX. But a famous example where that wasn't the case was with the iPad. And if you remember when the iPad first came out, everyone loved it. It was touch. It was really cool. You could make things swish on and off the screen. But there was a big problem with it, and it was that it didn't run Flash. And at the time, 30% of websites still were running Flash. And so that was a usability problem, but people didn't mind. That's one of the few times which people enjoyed the UX without minding the failure in usability. So why do we care about usability and UX? It's all about the money, right? Yes, usability and UX cost money up front. In order to do it properly, you want to test generally before launch, but overall, they tend to save money. So I talked briefly before about the $300 million button. Obviously, that making that usability change made that company a lot of money. Here is an example from a while ago. Bosch started producing dishwashers that made almost no sound, and they were very proud of this, and they started selling them, and people put them in their homes. And Bosch found out that people were calling them and saying, my dishwasher isn't working. So because the dishwasher was still under warranty, they would send a service person out to check on the dishwasher. And the service people would be sent out, costing the company money, and they would find out that the dishwasher was working just fine. It was in fact in mid-cycle. And the problem is that people are used to having some sort of feedback that something is happening. And the way these dishwashers were set up, there was nothing that indicated that the dishwasher was actually doing what it was supposed to do. And so now we get a little light at the bottom of our dishwasher when it starts to let us know, hey, I am in fact doing something. Please don't call Bosch and send out a service person. So that cost Bosch a fair amount of money in terms of sending out service workers, and also in terms of redesigning the entire dishwasher so that we can have this teeny little light that tells us that we're not doing something wrong with our expensive dishwasher. One thing that users really hate is broken links. And in my testing over the past decade or so, we've found that broken links cause people to quickly lose confidence in the site. And to the point that one broken link can reduce confidence in the website's ability by about 10%. And that if a second broken link found within 5 minutes can drop a consumer's confidence in the site by more like 30 to 35%. So it probably won't affect Disney too much, but other websites, especially ones that have more prominent competitors, that can be a problem. And also, you want to make sure that the most important thing is in fact the most important thing. So this is a nonprofit that my students did a project on a few years ago. And this up here was the navigation bar that we started off with. And one of the biggest problems that the nonprofit said to us was that they weren't getting enough donations from their site. They wanted to increase the donations. And the donation button was this small button up here. So what my students found recommended was to really make it stand out. they were doing a redesign of their website. My students suggested that there be one color that really stands out. And obviously I took this one recently because of the COVID link that's normally not there, but they changed it to orange. And they found that their year-over-year donations via the website went up by about 25%. So just making the most important thing for the site be, in fact, the most important thing can really improve the monetary and financial situation. So to recap, usability is about the ability of real users to complete the task, not the designers, not people who are stakeholders, but real users to complete a task. And UX is the degree to which those real users enjoy using the artifact. And we care about usability and UX because when they are good, they can save us money. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be back and I'll be showing you a couple of things anyone can do to check on the usability of their websites. So this is just sort of a teaser, I guess, for that. So does anyone have questions? If I can.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and take you off the screen share and we can go to gallery view so we can see everybody. All right. Okay, so if you want, you can go to the top right corner on your Zoom screen. If you're on speaker view right now, it's going to be a grid. And if you click it, it'll go to gallery view. And I know we don't all have our cameras on, but that way you can see all of us, or if you choose to turn on your camera and want to interact face-to-face, kind of face-to-face, you're welcome to. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, or you can put them in the chat if that's easier, or if you just have a comment about what we've been talking about. Anybody? Hi, Lacey.
Hello, I'm back. I just saw a question from in the chat. I'll let you handle that, Monty.
Yeah, so Erica is asking, well, first of all, she says, thank you for the presentation, and it was a great presentation. What color do you recommend for a logo?
So there's lots of schools of thought on this. Generally for a logo, the most important thing is just to have one or two colors, not to have a lot of colors, but just one or two colors. And you want to make sure that it's scalable. So you want to make sure that it could work for an icon on Facebook, or it could also work on a stationery, or it could work on a billboard if you wanted to go that big. You want it to be something that can really stand out. So from a color perspective, generally people, if you look at most of the logos out there, most of them are going to be red, blue, to a lesser extent you get some orange and greens, and even to a lesser extent you'll get like multiple colors. Famously eBay and Google use a whole bunch of different colors. Google is weird because they also do a weird color set, because usually you'll have people that use primary colors like eBay generally, but Google did primary colors and then threw in a green, and they did that, they said, just to be weird. One of their G's is green, which is not a primary color, and people that study logos really hate that. But generally reds and blues tend to be the easiest to print. Yellows tend to get faded out quite a bit. Oranges sometimes get lost as well, but that's just from a print perspective. I hope that helps, Erica.
I have a quick comment, actually. So in one of the last slides that you were discussing about the donate button, so I've definitely seen it where it's very small and it's hard to find, but I've also seen it where it's big and flashing, and even that like deters me from, because sometimes it can come off kind of spammy in a way. So that was just something that I remembered.
Yes. So, I mean, maybe you don't want to have it flashing or having, rotating text or anything. That gets a little too much. But you also don't want it to get lost. So the best way to make sure that it's not getting lost and it's not totally annoying is to do usability testing on it, to get some people, and again, I'll talk about it later, but to get some people and say, either give them a couple of different options to say which one is the most compelling to you, or to give options of other sites and say, what do you feel about this? How do you feel about this site? What do you feel about the donate button here? And then that way you can get feedback before you actually go live to know, okay, this button that's this big is way too big, but this button that is the same color as everything else, that is getting lost and people aren't finding it. So
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I'm just checking something real fast. So I'm thinking it might be helpful if we might do a quick little round of introductions. You don't have to turn your camera on, but that way we can kind of get a feel for where you're at, if you have maybe a business that you want to redo the site of, or just any kind of information like that. So if Erin, if you want to go first, I'll go ahead and unmute you. You do not have to put on your video. I think you might have to unmute yourself, actually. It's not working from my end. Or if anybody wants to jump in.
I'll start. I'm here twofold as the marketing member coordinator for Stoke, but also because just getting my head into the mindset of like, how are people using our site? How are people using Eventbrite? How are people using Meetup? How are we virtually connecting to people in this time where we have to find ways to do this online? So it's really helpful to kind of get a refresh on how people look at websites and buttons and how cognitively like colors affect our choices, even subconsciously. So that's why I'm here, just to think about things in kind of a user experience mindset. Especially in marketing, it's like, it's not just the design of things, but also like copy and stuff like that. So whatever it is that I can do that helps accomplish Stoke's mission of like cultivating community and empowering entrepreneurs and bringing people to our events and inviting people in, it's just super useful to think of things that way. So thank you.
Yeah, and maybe we're not used to, like Lacey, we're so in the weeds kind of doing all the back end things of making these events online and everything, that we're not seeing necessarily the perspective of the user. So yeah, this is a nice reminder to just make sure that everything is as user-friendly as possible. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Madi. I'm the hospitality and events coordinator at Stoke. And you know, I'm here to host, obviously, but just like Lacey said, this is really pertinent information for us as well. If no one else wants to introduce themselves, I'll go ahead and say the next question. This is from Kelly. She is asking, when rebuilding a platform via website or app, how to identify the problems that are user experience issues or usability issues?
sure. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. Sometimes people are really vocal and will tell you about it, right? So if you're getting emails or DMs or some people are telling you about problems, that's one way you can do it. Another way that you can find out information problems is by looking at your analytics on a site to see how long are people staying? What are they only staying on one page? Do you have a page that you think is super important and people are not going there, right? So if there's something like that, you can use the analytics from your site to help guide you into what might be a problem. And I always feel as though asking users is key to find out what the problem is, if you have, or if there are problems, right? So some people believe that you should test every couple of months your app and your website, regardless of whether or not you think there's any problems, but just test to see if people are still feeling the same way about your site. If there was sort of a website revolution, I guess you want to call it, a few years ago, where now all of a sudden all websites are going to start with a huge picture up at the top, right? And then you're going to scroll down in chunks. And now some people feel like when you have a website that doesn't look like that, that it's old. But other people feel like that it shows that where your emphasis is, okay? So, and whether or not that's good or bad or indifferent, you can only find that out as if you talk to people who are your users. So I would say, to recap, talk to your users, look at your analytics, and look at how people are talking to you.
So, sorry, I was on mute.
You're good.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So, is there like a standard list for people who are starting from scratch about like best practices for usability or user experience? So that's in terms of like building a website or designing an app or product.
Sure. So generally, there's these things called heuristics, okay? And all heuristics mean is guidelines. It's a fancy word that for some reason the field decided that we're going to pick the most obnoxious, erudite word for it instead of guidelines. But there's these things called heuristics, and you can Google website heuristics or app heuristics, and they are going to tell you things that are considered the best practices of websites. And some of them are going to be really, you're going to be like, of course, but one of them is, where should the search bar be, right? So Mari, I'm going to pick on you. If you go to a website, where do you think the search should be?
I always look at the top.
The top, right? So
Mhm.
generally it's going to be in the top right. Okay, that's sort of the convention of where it's going to be. But that only developed over time. If you go back and use the Wayback Machine to look at some websites from, like 2000, 1999, something like that, most of the search bars are going to be in a left-hand navigation bar at the top. Okay, but over time now, where we want to see that search bar is going to be on the top left. There's going to usually needs to be something there that indicates that it is in fact a search bar. So that's where we're going to see the magnifying glass or the grayed out text that says search on there. So that's one thing, but there are there's just these lists of things, like make sure there's no broken links, make sure that visited links change color, which I know that sounds a little dated in some ways, but that really helps users keep track of what information they've consumed and what information they have not consumed when links change colors. There's things about navigation bars that we have gotten really navigation bar crazy, and generally you want to have only 2 nested navigation bars and not 3 levels of navigation. So you might have a horizontal bar, and a vertical bar, or you might have a larger horizontal bar with a smaller one beneath it. But once you start getting to 3 layers, that convention has found that people are pretty good about figuring out a website's organization when there's 2 layers of navigation. But once you go to 3, that layer gets really confusing to people. And people generally want to know where they are in a website and be able to figure out how to get back to where they were. And that's one thing that really, really frustrates people, is if they click on something and they go to another page and then they can't get back to where they were before. One of the conventions that has come up in the past 8 years or so is the ability to click on the logo on whatever page you're on and know that clicking on the logo is going to take you back to the home page. Where people get frustrated is if it doesn't take you back to the home page, or if it takes you back to a different page. And so just sort of those kinds of expectations. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of heuristics out there depending on what your focus is. Sometimes there's focus for mobile. So mobile heuristics. Some are heuristics for populations. So there are some heuristics out there for over 65. Like if you have a product that is really for people that are going to be 60 and older, 65 and older, then you want to make sure that there's some things that are made on your website that are going to be a little bit different than if your website was designed for, a college student. Not to say that a 65-year-old couldn't be a college student, because I have a 65 and 72-year-old and college students right now. So yeah, let me clarify. Let's say a 22-year-old instead of a college student.
Yeah, and I actually have kind of a question regarding that. So say you have a product that's for the 22-year-old and the over 65-year-old, and you want to make sure the website is simple enough to where the over 65 crowd who might have more difficulty navigating websites,
Mhm.
to where they can still do it, but they want to make the website not boring, basically. You know, like I'd say generally, and I might be wrong, but some of the websites that I see that are more geared toward like my age group are a little bit more intricate in their design and a little bit more stylish and like fun to use
Okay.
for, you know, my age group.
Mhm.
But then kind of like those cricket phone, not the cricket phones,
Okay.
but the Firefly phones, I
Yeah.
guess.
Jitterbugs.
Jitterbugs, that's it. You know how it's like 2 buttons
Right.
kind of a thing.
Mhm.
So would you say to kind of reconcile that, if you're trying to do both age groups, like color is a way to bridge the gap, or what's like the happy medium?
So this is sort of the dirty rule of usability, is that there is no happy medium. You're going to pick it. You're going to pick an audience, and it is better to delight one audience than to be okay to a whole bunch of audiences. So pick an audience that you think is the best, and that might you might have to do audience analysis. You might need to go out and talk to people, interview them, find out what they like, and find out that one area that I've done usability testing for, where we find these 2 groups, is libraries, which is kind of odd, but uh, libraries often say that their 2 biggest groups are young mothers who are trying to figure out how to take their kids to the library, and retirees. Okay, and so they have these 2 populations. And if you go to library websites, you're going to find quickly where that particular library is dedicating their resources. Okay, so they're going to be thinking, okay, we are making this be a website for that mother, or it's going to be, we are making this website for this older population. And they are making those decisions partly based on analytics, partly based on questions that they are getting in, and partly looking at who's actually coming into the library back when, you know, you could go to a library. So there was ultimately, what you want to do is make it so that whoever you decide is your primary target audience, you want to make that be the best experience for that audience. And the other audiences are probably going to figure it out, but make someone super happy. And then instead of making everyone sort of meh, it's okay. That's sort of a little rule of usability and UX.
No, that's a good, I was really wondering about that, of just what is the, but that makes sense
Mhm.
to optimize one, make it as perfect as possible. Does anybody else have any questions?
I'm not sure I gave you my email address, but you can Google
Yeah,
me.
pop it in
I guess I
there.
can type it in. Here, I'll type it in. I can do that.
That would be great.
And anyone, you are welcome to send me anything that you would like. That's me. But yeah, and I'll be back. I don't remember when I'm coming back. May. And that's
May,
like a whole month away, so I don't remember when it is.
it's early May.
7th? May 7th?
That sounds right. I
Is
was
it?
thinking the 6th or the 7th.
Okay, it's a Thursday.
Not sure. Yes.
Whatever, if it's,
Well,
is it?
not sure. But
Whatever's the
it is,
Thursday,
we'll
I'll be
be
back.
posting about it.
And I'll
Definitely.
be giving some hints on how to do some of these more practical things to improve your website or your app or your mobile website, and what some tools are for that.
Well, awesome. I'm excited for that. And I hope
Okay.
that everybody who joined us today can join us for the meeting, the next meeting in about a month or so. And this will be recorded. It's recording right now, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel. If you guys need to come back to the video to refer to any points or anything like that. So just be on the lookout for that. But if that's all the questions, then I think we're all finished up here.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Erica. And thank you, Erin. This was really a good learning experience, I think, for all of us. It's things that we don't normally think about.
Excellent. Well,
Okay.
everyone take care, and I'll hopefully see you in a couple of weeks.
All
Bye.
right, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.